Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Talking Points with Matt and Matt. Today, we are going to talk about a conversation that the philosopher John Zerzan had a while back on the radio program Coast to Coast AM. John Zerzan calls himself an anarcho-primitivist, and anarcho-primitivists have very interesting ideas, to say the least. I thought it might be worth discussing it just because we both sympathize with anarchism, although we might sympathize with different versions of it or different interpretations of anarchism. But we can both see value in at least certain kinds of anarchist thought, anarchist tendencies, anarchist philosophies, and whatnot. And I guess I'll just start off by saying it's interesting to me because it takes the idea of anarchy, but you could almost say maybe it takes it to an extreme, or it takes the anarchist critique into a very specific direction. So a lot of times, most anarchists they're critiquing the state, and they're critiquing capitalism, state capitalism, or just other kinds of capitalism. But the anarcho-primitivist is critiquing like society as a whole, or I should say technological society, in a industrial and post-industrial society. The anarcho-primitivist says that argues against technological societies in favor of something more natural, I guess you could say. So I think that's a pretty good kind of introduction to the thought. I'm kind of curious to hear your first takes on the whole idea, and maybe some of John Zerzan's arguments, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I thought this interview was really awesome to listen to, not because of anything he said. Okay, so I guess I should preface it by saying I don't think I agree with John Zerzan on much of anything. But where I agree with him, I really agree with him. So that makes it for a really interesting interview. And one of the things I like about it is I do this thing, which is kind of obnoxious at times, where I'll listen to stuff and then I'll draw a meta narrative around what he's saying. And it's an interesting question that I think, some of his thoughts end up bringing up, even if it's indirect. And while listening to John Zerzan talk about anarcho-primitivism, I was having a lot of those moments. So I found it fascinating. It honestly makes me want to read Kaczynski, which I've wanted an excuse to read Kaczynski just kind of for the meme of it. But now I'm like, okay, I've heard a lot about him, how he critiques the left, and now I really want to hear if Kaczynski is real intense anti-left. I could see a way you could take Zerzan's kind of the topics he talked about and turn them against pretty much anybody on the American left. And it's just fascinating. So I guess just to throw out a few places that maybe we could start. Pretty much a core tenet of anarcho-primitivism that really comes out of him talking is the way that we view progress as a society is kind of inherently wrong to him. And they actually, I don't know if you listened all the way through to the listener questions, but somebody calls in during this and they pretty much make an argument for specialization. And they say when people specialize, you kind of get economies of scale. And then when you have economies of scale, you get leisure time, and that's when you can make technological advancements. And then Zerzan pretty much is like, I don't understand why you're saying these technological advancements are a good thing for all these reasons. So a lot of things that anybody would traditionally think as good due to I guess technological progress, they're saying no, this is bad. And if you look at human civilization, there was a huge stretch of time that was most of humanity's existence where we were not making progress, and that was good. So he really flips it on its head, and all these things we would say are benefits from, I guess, economics as a whole aren't actually benefits. They're what make us unnatural and therefore bad. So I think this also raises a couple questions of when you're looking at things as a consequentialist, right? So if you don't have these sacred values that are maxims that you can't violate, like I have the non-aggression principle, it's a maxim you can't violate. But if you're a consequentialist and you're, say, focusing on a certain aim, and you want to maximize that aim, John Zerzan kind of comes in and throws a curveball, and he says, well, I'm a consequentialist too, but your aim is stupid, right? Because you could be aiming for progress, or you could be aiming for maximizing certain kinds of output. But John Zerzan pretty much is making the case that he wants to maximize happiness, and the way he thinks we maximize happiness is actually by reverting to what is essentially a primitive time when we were hunter-gatherers, essentially, in the long run. And that's a fascinating way to take it, because he's leaning into the consequentialist argument. And he's pretty much saying, but this is what we should aim for, and the things you're aiming for as consequentialist aren't working. So I think that's interesting. Maybe you can bounce off that a little bit.
So, as with any political ideology, it's almost hard to know where to begin, because people can mean various things when they identify as this, that, or the other thing. But I think you did a good job of laying out kind of some of the core tenets of anarcho-primitivism. And I guess I want to start by maybe thinking about the things that they might either have right, or at least there's a kernel of truth in some of the things they talk about. So the anarcho-primitivist, and John Zerzan actually talks about this. He says, things like depression and mental illness are going up, suicide is going up, people are unhappy in relationships, people are unhappy with the grind of going to a 9-to-5. And so, John Zerzan is saying that we're all kind of profoundly unhappy in a sense, but that's because we're chained to this idea of technological progress. And if you really think about it, our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, at some level, might have even been happier because they didn't have to deal with all of the issues that we have to deal with. And I guess I might say that I can agree with that critique, even if I don't agree with the solutions that he's proposing. So obviously there are issues that we as a post-industrial society are dealing with that perhaps primitive societies, or so-called primitive societies, wouldn't be dealing with. Of course, the question then is, do we aim for more simplistic lifestyle, a more natural lifestyle, or do we just try to do we try to reform like this society, this technological society we have, and do we just keep continuing to rely on technology, or is there a time when we have to kind of give up technology? And even one of the first things John Zerzan said that struck me, and so I wrote it down. He's like, I want to go back to the Stone Age. That's a big statement, and most people would say, "What? You're crazy." And then the other thing that I just kind of want to throw out there, well, I guess a couple things. So one, when I think about the lifestyle that Native American Indians had prior to colonialization. Now, obviously, most of them have either integrated into society or they live on reservations. But if I'm thinking about, and of course, there were various different societies in the Native American, there were different kinds of societies among Native American Indians, and we can't quite generalize. But generally, you could say that they were, they lived very different lives than most Europeans did. That they didn't have the kind of technology that Europeans did for various environmental reasons. But so I can see some value in that kind of hunter-gatherer lifestyle. I can even see some, in a sense, where you could say that is my. I could see. Excuse me, I'm stuttering. I could see if someone were to say that like the hunter-gatherer lifestyle is more moral. I could even understand that in a sense, because you're kind of living off of the earth, but you're living off of it in such a way as to you're not necessarily disturbing it. or you're not actually necessarily changing it. You're just kind of living in it and kind of dealing with what nature gives you. And then there's also some thought that if one's a leftist, that they might like the idea that certain Native American Indian societies were more egalitarian or equal. And then, like, the other thing I wanted to add quickly was when I think about anarcho-primitivism, I always think about Jean-Jacques Rousseau's discourse on the arts and sciences. Now, Rousseau wasn't a primitivist, in fact. Some people kind of mistake him as a primitivist. But in that work, he does offer substantial critiques of modern, I guess what would now be called modern civilization. And there's, as everyone knows, there's nothing you never run out of criticisms of civilization. That there's definitely a lot of stuff. We have a lot of problems that we have to really reconceptualize a lot of things if we want to create a better world for the average person. So it's like anarcho-primitivism. It has a long history in a sense. You could say maybe people like Thoreau are in that tradition. So it's not necessarily something that's just recent, that just kind of popped out of nowhere. That there is an intellectual tradition, or there are people who kind of were thinking along the anarcho-primitivist line before people actually started calling themselves anarcho-primitivists. So yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, kind of maybe talk a little bit about maybe where anarcho-primitivists have a point or two. You can bounce a little off that, and then I'll give my more substantial my critiques of anarcho-primitivism and the reasons why I'm not an anarcho-primitivist.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you laid out there, Juju, just about anarcho-primitivism in general. And it is really interesting to hear people talk about it. And I like how you bring up that there's a hint of truth and everything. That's kind of my mantra, because as much as I adamantly have my views, I definitely can see why somebody could get to a point where they think a certain way, even if I don't agree with them on all the points that they're making, right? And that's why I don't agree with their arguments, because a few points they don't always follow. And I did want to mention that everything he lays out kind of reminds me of a book I had to read for kind of like a gen ed college class I took. It was called Ancient Futures, and it was Ancient Futures, and I pulled it up as you were talking. Its subtitle is it's like about how these it was pretty much in 2000 a reporter goes to this tribe that only farms and hunts and gathers. I don't even remember where. I was gonna say the city, but it's nobody would recognize the name of it, so there's no point. And then that was in peak globalization kind of talk era. It was 2000. So it was all about look at these people. They're just a community. All they do is farm, and they're all happier than we are with our technologically integrated lives. And that was back in 2000. Think about that now, where we've infinitely escalated that. And the whole argument is pretty much look how happy these people are, even though they have nothing. And there's a point there to think about. It's if life was simpler and we didn't have all these things, maybe we could be happier, and maybe we should be cognizant of the effects of our lifestyles and such. Now, I know you're going to get into criticisms of Zerzan, and I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but I think a lot of what he's saying is kind of pointless in the sense that I think it's got a Pandora's box effect. So I think if you're born into the kind of society where you have nothing and you don't have all these stressors we have, and you were raised in a certain community setting and you never had all the ailments we have, you could be happy in that lifestyle. But once you have things like modern plumbing and you have certain technological advances, I don't think you can go away from them. So I think the only reason why we don't appreciate it is because we've taken all that for granted, which I mean, I am not super upset that we take it for granted. It is what it is. But if we still lived in the Stone Age and we had to live without any of these technological innovations, I don't think we'd be happy going back towards it, or most people would be, after living in the world we have now. because everything would feel so inconvenient. So even though he's laying out a good argument for like why these certain lifestyles were historically better, now that we're here, I don't think what he's saying matters. That's my main criticism. And in the context of Ancient Futures, that book I had to read, I think there were people who went out of the city and left. And it was one of those things where I don't think those people became happier. I remember their lives getting worse. But once you have certain things in your life, you can't leave them because you've become accustomed to them. And that's how our technological innovations kind of are. So when Zerzan kind of talks about, about attacking certain institutions, I'm kind of like, well, I don't like those institutions either. I'm with you. But but the issue with it is I don't see me wanting to live a life where I don't have electricity running through my house and running water and plumbing without even having to worry about it. I just pay a small bill. So yeah, I want to throw that out there. But I want to hear a lot of your criticisms because I think you're going to go a lot of different ways.
So yeah, I mean, I guess part of what I was going to say does tie back into what you just said. The fact that we have developed industrial and post-industrial societies, and the fact that so many people are used to that way of living. I don't see. I agree with you on this. I don't see a way around that. I don't see a way to change course, so to speak, in the sense of going backwards in a sense, or simplifying things to the point of only using I don't know, like spears made out of stone and wood. The other thing that worries me about anarcho-primitivism is you could almost say it has a certain kind of pessimism to it, or fatalism to it, which I don't quite trust or agree with. Because I think John Zerzan and many other anarcho-primitivists would say that civilization will inevitably collapse. It will, like they would say, it will happen, period, no questions asked. It's just a question of when is it going to happen. And that's a very tough issue, of course, and if we want to talk about it, we can. But like the thing that worries me about that is if we're accepting that the society, modern technological society is going to collapse in 10, 20, 50, 100 years, we are accepting that not only perhaps would millions of people not be happy, millions of people would die. People do not know how to like hunt for food and what plants are poisonous and what plants are edible. I'm not saying people couldn't learn those things, but the learning curve would be so steep at this point to where the most of the population on this planet would just die of starvation, or just perhaps even just like interpersonal violence, fighting over just basic resources. And so, I'm not an anarcho-primitivist in the sense that I don't think that kind of fate is inevitable. I think there are ways. I think there are ways that we can still keep our technological civilization while minimizing the damage that we could be inflicting onto the planet through burning fossil fuels and through industrial farming. And through all these things, which you can easily, which are, you can legitimately criticize. But I think there's a way to do it without having such a strong human cost. And just to reiterate what you also said, I don't think it would even if we wanted to do it, I don't think we could, because of how ingrained technology is in humans' lives. And actually, to even kind of broaden this conversation out a bit, it's kind of interesting. Another like point that John Zerzan kind of completely disagrees with is the idea that humans are innovative. He basically says that for a good portion, a good chunk of like human history, people weren't innovative and they just were hunter gatherers, and it didn't go any farther than that. The kind of the folk wisdom or the general consensus is that people are innovative and that we will create technology, and that technology is in some sense natural or to humans. And of course, that kind of gets more into like anthropology and archaeology and psychology. And I'm not any of those. I'm not a anthropologist, archaeologist, or psychologist, but I do suspect that humans. I do suspect that John Zerzan's probably wrong, and I do think humans are innovative, and I do think we do kind of create technologies by nature, and it's even possible that we could create technologies which create technology which helps us fight, climate change, which helps mitigate the excesses of industrialization. And then, the anarcho-primitivist might say, well, no, the issue is technology. You can't use technology to fight the evils of technology. And in some sense, I'm almost saying like, well, yes, you can. And that's exactly what we should be doing. So yeah, that's my piece said.
So I think if he was able to talk to us right now, if he popped in the conversation, I think he would say something like that we could squabble about the environmental ways to address environmental policy if you want to, but he's actually spent most of that interview arguing about the human effects. And he didn't really talk about the macro effects of carbon emissions and how we're polluting the planet. I mean, to some extent, he talked about how agriculture is bad because it started the trajectory in that direction. But he didn't really say the problem is emissions. If we could do our same lifestyle, but net zero, then it'd be okay. He's more saying, no, this makes people unhappy. And the other thing I think, because he did talk about wanting a smaller population, which a lot of people would hear that and you can straw man it and immediately say, okay, well, this guy like essentially wants the deterioration of the human race to some extent. And I think that's a little misleading, but I guess what he's admitting there is he's pretty much saying the values that he thinks the best human life is would not be sustainable for the amount of people we have at once. And I think he's okay with that. And the only thing you have to like kind of push back on it is how do we get from A to B? Because then you can fill in your head a lot of ways that are gross that have happened in human history that took out a large amount of population. So but I don't want to throw that on him because I don't think we need to critique him. The other thing is if we were going to talk about, say, well, if we lost everything, think of all the loss of life we'd have because not everybody could do that kind of lifestyle because we've adapted to our current lifestyle. He'd probably say like, well, but imagine for the people who can adapt, how much more fulfilled they would be compared to their current lifestyle because people are sitting at jobs where they're drones and they're not achieving anything. And this is like the most natural existence people have happily had for millions of years. Now, I think this goes to a weird place where, and this is why people will call me a person who's like, sounds like a libertarian, because to some extent, that's the type of anarchism I adopt is something closer to libertarianism. Like, I guess I like the term market anarchist. I don't think anybody says that, but I think that's a phrase I like. But it's because I hear these things that he's saying, and I could see why a person would rather hunt and live on their own land and like survive that way than go to work every day. Because going to work every day in an office job kind of sucks, and it's not very fulfilling. So I could see why somebody would want to opt out of our quote unquote civilized society, and then they could say, hey, I don't want these economies of scale because they make me depressed, and I'd rather be a weird hunter that's take on these risks than want to blow my brains out. It's like, that's fair. That's subjective evaluations of life. But the problem is he like wants the world to be like it. And it's like some people aren't going to be able to survive as hunters and some people aren't going to want to be as hunters. Some people can sell a few hours of their time for a lot of money and then they can buy food for super cheap because somebody else makes it at a huge scale and they don't really care. And they can live their dream. So That's my biggest pushback. Is it's kind of like this hugely collectivist idea that clearly does not work for a lot of people. And I could see how you could make a historical argument for maybe humanity would on average be happier if we never adopted agriculture and advanced from there. But then you're maximizing happiness, and I'm not even sure I'm okay with any kind of consequentialist argument because I don't know what thing we should maximize. So I'm not cocky enough to say we should maximize individual happiness, because maybe the fact that people have dedicated hundreds of years to different kinds of arts that you can only do because we have so much free time, maybe that has human value in and of itself. So maybe I'm like, well, that should be in the calculation. And if you're hunting and gathering, that's not. So like, but I don't know the calculation because I'm not trying to centrally plan a society. So in a weird way, you can say he's an anarchist because he's clearly rebelling against our current institutions and hates our institutions, and that's fine. I don't think I think that's consistent with what he's saying. But he also wants everybody to act this way, right? That's the kind of the core of the ideology: is humanity should be this natural way, and that's not very anarchist in my estimation, because it wants everybody to act a certain way. So that was one of my takeaways I wanted to lean into, and I think that's how I'd respond to him if he was here to respond to you, if that makes sense.
Another point that I think is interesting to think about is Zerzan's. He connects agriculture with abstract thought, and this is interesting in a sense because Zerzan is basically saying that I mean, obviously, we've already been over. He's against like mass or industrial agriculture, but industrial agriculture. I'm not sure that makes sense, but he's against. I'm struggling for the term here, but the mass type of agriculture that we have, the agriculture that is based on technology. But there's a word for that, and I can't even think of it. But anyway, point being, he's critiquing. Not only is he critiquing agriculture, he's critiquing abstract thought in a sense. So he's saying that when we as humans developed or evolved this capacity for abstract thought, we developed the capacity to objectify the world, basically. We could objectify other people. We could objectify nature. We could objectify everything. And so therefore, at some level, Zerzan might say that we live our lives in order to try to we try to get the world, we use the world's resources to like maximize our own personal benefit in a sense. And so he would blame that. He would blame a lot of oppression and inequality from this this ability to think about things from a theoretical perspective. And there's two things you could say to that. So the first thing is, I could see that his argument, I could say that his argument is correct in a sense. I mean, I could understand why he comes to that point. I can follow the logic, in other words. It's like, okay, if I have the ability, if I have the capacity for abstract thought, then maybe it follows that I can turn someone else into an abstraction and therefore mistreat them because they're not a human in my mind. They're just an object. They're just something I can use. But like my criticism is, it's almost kind of similar to our criticism about like technological society. So we've been saying like we just don't see, neither of us sees a way to get out of a technological society or to move away from a technological society. And so it's a similar thing. And in fact, even more so, I can't imagine a world where we don't have abstract thought. It's just kind of, for some reason, it's the way our brains evolved. We just have this capacity. We can't really change that about ourselves. We can't really like we can't really construct. We don't construct ourselves from like nothing. We come from hundreds of millions of years of evolution, and then what is it? I guess anthropologists say like humans have either been around for about 100,000 or 200,000 years. So it's like we are a certain way, or we are the way we are because of like that 100,000 to 200,000 years of evolution, and then all the other, and then the evolution going all the way back to the one common ancestor. But my point being that because of this, abstract thought is just, it's so ingrained in what it means to be a human being that I can't see a way to get away from abstract thought. And I'm not going to take a cheap shot and say, well, he's doing abstract thought, therefore you're invalid. I'm not going to do that. But I do think that even if I accept his criticisms of abstract thought, I think abstract thought is necessary. And I think it's just something that people do even. You don't even have to, like, people think abstractly without even realizing they think abstractly. So it's just the way we are. It's just the way we were almost. It's just the way humans, if you'll forgive the phrase, it's kind of the way we were designed in a sense. And so I just think, I almost think that earlier you said something about like one of his points or one of his arguments was almost pointless, and I almost feel the same way about this argument he makes. It's like, okay, you can critique abstract thought, but at the end of the day, everyone's going to use abstract thought, and so we're stuck with it.
I think the most hopeful case, if I wanted to talk myself into being an anarcho-primitivist, I think the best line of thought I'd have to do is so I listened to the audiobook like it was a while ago. It was this book all about the West. Joe Rogan talked about it a lot. It's one of the stories it covers. I'm gonna butcher it because I'm just not gonna even really try. It was just a famous white person got abducted by the Indians during one of this famous skirmishes. This is why I don't talk about history, because I cannot put myself in those shoes enough to remember anybody's name or any event. But it's like they're just things I know that get lodged there. And then this conversation is reminding me of this famous situation where she gets abducted, and when the Native Americans pretty much wanted to sell her back to the white people or hold her for ransom or something like that. I think they were calling her the white squaw, something like that. She didn't want to go back because she is like, no, I actually like this better. It's more simple. Well, once I got adjusted, it was pretty great. So like the best case for anarcho-primitivism is that a collapse happens inevitably. Then when the collapse happens, people have to resort back to these primal institutions. And then people who are living in our current time realize they would realize the primal way of living is actually superior to our current one, and then that now that they've learned not to go back. Something like that would have to happen. But then the problem is, if everything goes to hell, some people are still going to have technology, and not everybody's going to immediately revert to that. There are going to be people trying to make progress, and then once that progress happens, best case scenario for the anarcho-primitivists, you get a do-over of what happened in United States history, where the people who remain primitive get wiped out again. So it's like, in practice, like there is a chain of events that could lead to some people realizing they like that lifestyle more than our current lifestyle if they're put in that situation by a crazy external event. It's like that can happen. I'll accept that that's possible. But like, I feel like I'm crazy when I talk about worlds where there's no government and how awesome commerce could be if it was unimpeded and how that would resolve so many problems. But you have to like reach for a specific hypothetical to imagine a world where anarcho-primitivism is relevant, which kind of sucks because it raises a bunch of cool questions. But in the end, there's not a lot tangible and concrete you can reach to. And this kind of ties into your abstract thought point. It's like, okay, but unfortunately, we live in a world where everybody who's alive right now has been accustomed to doing this. Like, I can imagine if there was a newborn baby tomorrow and it was day one of the apocalypse and it had to hunter and gather its whole life, even with evolution, it just might not think that much if it's put in that situation. But everybody who's alive right now that would experience that great decline that would put us there would have abstract thought. And they would have to survive and then decide that it wasn't worth it and then to not inculcate future generations with it. So it's like, that's just not going to happen. But he's interesting to talk about for the aforementioned reasons of like the critiques of our current society, talking about, I guess, in general, like what hierarchies are legitimate, and then talking about why anarcho-primitivism is the best, which is like because of what you're aiming at, right? And if you're aiming to maximize certain things, well, maybe people a million years ago were doing it better than us. And that is a fascinating thought experiment, and there's something to gain there. Yeah. Do you have more to add?
I guess I would add two things. I actually suspect that our tendency to abstract thought has even more to do with our biology and less to do with our upbringing, in a sense. So I even think at that point, and if a baby was born in this anarcho-primitivist world, I still think they would think abstractly. They just might be thinking about different things, and they might not think in exactly the same way that you and I think, if we're talking about the specific things that education leads us to think about, and the way education leads us to think about. And then the other thing, it kind of goes back to your point about subjective evaluations. I enjoy listening to music. I enjoy watching movies. I enjoy reading fiction, and all of those are, in some sense, abstractions. I mean, if you have you can have a physical copy of a DVD or a CD or a physical copy of a book, but a lot of the work, in a sense, almost goes into your. It comes from your head, comes from you thinking about it, listening to it, reading. And I derive a lot of pleasure from watching movies, listening to music, and reading fiction. I would feel deprived in some sense if I were not able to indulge in art, just because art means that much to me, and it brings a meaning and pleasure to my life. And so that's an example of like a way that humans use abstract thought that I think is a net benefit. And even if it's not a net benefit, or you can't quantify that, I just enjoy it myself. And so I would not want to live in a world where art in these various forms didn't exist. And I think that, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, there might be art in an anarcho-primitivist society, but it would be such a different kind of art. It would be, I mean, there wouldn't be, how would I put it? I just don't see that that art really, the way we think about art, at least in our modern context, I don't think that would exist in an anarcho-primitive society. And if art did exist, it would be art in a different sense. But I like art in the modern sense. And yeah, so yeah, I think I got my point across.
Yeah, and I don't think I need to add on that specific point. I think the last thing that comes to mind, and I think the crossover in the intellectual space I want Zerzan. I want like a Zerzan-Peterson hybrid. So I want like the person talking about how self-actualization is through a hero's journey, and like directly providing and like dominant roles of like knowing that you are fulfilling the needs of people in your life, but instead of in our modern day by doing it through mundane work, it's like a guy arguing for when you kill that animal and now you can feed your family, you're like actualizing at the higher level instead of at the like our current version. And our current version is like twice removed, and that could be why people are overdosing on drugs, because they have no meaning. So I want to see like an anarcho-primitivist co-opt Jordan Peterson's arguments for these like old stories from that primitive time, and then use them to make the primitive case, because I think that'd be really interesting. So yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna dedicate my life to that. But somebody should essentially rewrite maps of meaning through an anarcho-primitivist lens. I'd be game to read that. Did you have any more to say on Zerzan? I think I'm ready to try our second topic because I think time permits, and I think we have covered it pretty well. Okay. So one thing that we kind of wanted to talk about is that there's just been a lot of current events going on, a lot going on in terms of the United States politics, and I've been, as we talk about philosophical things on this show regularly, it doesn't give me many opportunities to go on complete tirades about the things that are going on around us. So I was able to talk Matt into us having a secondary topic that was more contemporary. Because last time we got to talk about contemporary politics was kind of a argument about BLM, and that was a handful of episodes ago. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court and our perceptions of the politics around it. Now, I kind of want to hear what you have to say, because I don't know how much you're going to adopt your partisan, party lines. Because I have like a very meta view that involves thinking most people are sheep, and it's very cynical. And I don't think a lot of this matters, but I think that's why it's important to talk about, is because people are getting furious about something that I don't perceive as actually being something of substance. So that's my meta commentary. Do you want to give your point, and then I'll try to tell you where you're misguided, maybe?
So I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I often wear two hats, or like I have two ways of thinking about politics. So there is like my abstract theoretical philosophical hat, where like I'm thinking about my ideal, and then like the various moral implications of certain ideologies and certain policies. And then there's my you could say like my activist hat, or my politician hat, where I stoop down to the level of petty politics, and I like talk about, like, if I were a senator or a representative or the president or whatever, this is what I would do. And I think those are just kind of two necessary ways to go about thinking about these things, and because I'm interested in, or because I am seeking the maximization of happiness or contentment among people. I want to better the material conditions of the average person. I'm willing to meddle in. I'm willing to talk about the ins and outs of politics and how to play politics and whatnot. And that is just kind of a general disagreement that we have. So, okay, about the courts, though. This is kind of the way that I think about the courts. And this is, again, it's going to sound very like Machiavellian, and it's going to sound I'm going to sound like almost like a sleazy politician in a sense, but I don't see a way around it. So, fast forward or like rewind a couple years ago. I think it must have been Justice Scalia died under President Obama, and the Republicans. I think it was Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. He said, we're not even going to have, not only are we not going to vote to appoint, or not only are we going to allow Obama to get another justice on the court, we're not even going to have hearings. And not only did he do that, he prevented court appointees at various levels. So it wasn't just the Supreme Court. It wasn't just the Supreme Court that the Republicans didn't want Obama appointing anyone to. It was various courts at various levels, local, state, federal, etc. So I take a very cold view of all this. I think if that's the way the Republicans are going to play politics, then what I say is like beat them at their own game. And it's actually, I was talking to my stepfather the other day, and like he said something that was very striking to me. He said, I like how Obama, or I like when Michelle says that if they go low, we go high. But then he added, when they go low, we go lower. And that is my view quite often of a lot of these issues. Now, of course, the Democrats don't have the power to completely block Trump's appointee. And I would imagine it's likely that she does get that appointment. But the Democrats do have it in their capacity to lengthen the process as much as possible, and preferably lengthen the process all the way through the election. I think that's exactly what they should do. I don't think that doesn't make me feel morally uncomfortable, because you have to get dirty in politics. It's just the nature of the job. And I do prefer the Democrats over the Republicans, even if both parties are completely broken. But so yeah, in short, the Democrats should do whatever it is in their power to lengthen this process so much that it doesn't happen. No one's appointed until after the election.
I like what you said, because the main talking point that is the most irritating, and I think for obvious reason, is when any group of people implies that there's a sort of principled stance you could take that makes sense here. Because it's clearly, it's essentially an administrative problem, where it's like you run into a certain event, right? A Supreme Court justice dies, you have certain people in power, and there is no principle of if you should act on it or not. There is no philosophical backing or any moral backing for anybody to either do or not do something. But because Mitch McConnell last time said, well, why would I approve of justice if I can just wait a year? That's not that bad. When Obama was president, now people are taking this pseudo-principled stance of, well, if he wouldn't approve of justice when it was a Democrat, that means he can't when it's Republicans. And there's no reasoning behind this that's compelling. It literally just means, I mean, you can't make a case that you should have to approve both or not approve both, because there's a different situation. The whole idea is the Senate approves nominees, so why would the Senate be compelled to, though? Because they're also allowed to say to vote no on people. So I guess I don't see any principled opinion, and you're not taking a principled stance. So I actually appreciate that, because there isn't one. And the pseudo moral righteous babbling coming from Democrats right now is so irritable that I can't believe people will hear it and then continue to repeat the Democrats' mantras all over social media, because that case isn't compelling. There's no good logic behind it. It's just saying, well, you blocked Obama's, so that means you're not allowed to approve somebody this time, when there's no reason you should draw a rule from one event happening. It's just a jump that makes no sense. So those are the people I'm most disheartened by. I'm glad you didn't take that stance. I'm also glad you took the stance of when they go low, you go lower, for very selfish reasons, because that's the way politics is turning. And there are some institutionalists, like I would call Ben Shapiro an institutionalist, because he cares a lot about our institutions. So he hates that mindset, because he's like, well, now our institutions are just going to be no filibuster. You're not going to have any of these things that safeguarded our government from, slight majorities. None of these things anymore, because everybody has to get even at all times. But when I hear when they go low, you should go lower, and then we should have our politicians having no principles and really just doing what is most politically palatable to advance their objectives, that's the stuff that adds to the general distrust of government. And that's the stuff that decays the institutions. And I hate these institutions. So I love to hear that. I like when Republicans drag people into the mud, and I like when Democrats drag people into the mud, because you're killing the government indirectly, because nobody believes in them anymore. It's awesome. So I'm all here for that. Now, where I start to get dicey with you is the actual analysis of the situation, of if RBG's seat actually matters. And I have the hot take opinion of, I don't think a Republican replacing RBG is actually very important. And the reason I say that is, well, if you look at the court and you exclude whoever's replaced, you actually have two Republicans that are not very radical, which is Brett Kavanaugh and Roberts. And I don't see them willing to do things that are super radical. So you'll still have three Democrats and two Republicans that are afraid of being radical, which means you will not get 5 radical justices on any crazy decisions that will make half of America's mind explode. You're just going to have all these marginal Republican decisions that nobody ever notices and doesn't make the news, and they're not going to be willing to take up important cases. So I think all of this media propaganda about fear, like I check into Michael Moore's podcast every now and then, and he says women are going to be enslaved like The Handmaid's Tale. And it's like, okay, Michael Moore, that's great. All these people are anti-abortion, but Brett Kavanaugh and Roberts are not going to overturn Roe. They're not. You're spreading this misinformation because you want. Well, he believes it, so I'm not going to say he's doing it because he's evil. He believes it, and a lot of people believe it. But that's not how things are going to play out. I'd put like thousands of dollars. I'd put like my net worth on the line, right? Because I don't see it happening. So I think there's been all this media blitz all about the importance of the seat, and I don't think anything significant is going to happen. And it just shows how much headspace this takes up and how little most of things matter. Because the things that matter most are things that aren't even debated, in my opinion, which is like how a bunch of incompetent buffoons that can't even have a constructive 90-minute conversation will get to decide how to spend a third of my income for the next 4 years. Like, I feel like that's pretty important, but that's not on the debate stage. Instead, it's people arguing about things that probably won't happen when a Republican fills a Supreme Court justice seat. So that's my other takeaway that I don't think you'll agree with me on, even though we can mostly agree on the previous points.
I mean, I guess I would start by saying I might pay a certain amount of lip service to certain liberal talking points that you were criticizing, in the sense that I mean, I think you could say the ideal would be to have principled politicians, but we don't live in that ideal. Probably won't ever live in that ideal. So I don't necessarily claim, like, if I were a politician or if I'm talking about, ways to get involved in politics, I'm not necessarily making like grand moral claims. I'm saying, like, this is my estimation of this is what I value. This is what I think, based on what I value, this is kind of the way I think society should be generally run. And so I'm going to do what I can to get there. And I don't even necessarily have to like give lengthy philosophical arguments in favor of those things. I mean, we do have those conversations on the podcast. But, as I said, politics is not really clean. I don't think it's ever really been clean. And so I do agree with you in the sense that I think it's silly to, like, this faux moral outrage, or I guess I shouldn't say faux moral outrage. Some people are actually morally outraged when politicians behave in unscrupulous ways. It's kind of like, that's what politicians do. You should expect that, and reply in kind. But the other, like, I guess the major point, and this is where we do come to a disagreement. I do think who's the people elected to the Supreme Court. I do think it matters who is who is nominated to the Supreme Court. The founders of this country, like, they created the court and they tried to make it as nonpartisan as possible. Now, that's just not how it works. You have liberal judges and conservative judges, and they base their judging generally off of that. You don't have any ANCOMs or any fascists on the Supreme Court, so you don't have to say necessarily that there's going to be like crazy radical change, but it is possible. I would say this, for example. I mean, even if I grant you that that Republicans wouldn't try to overturn Roe versus Wade if if more conservatives are appointed to the Supreme Court, I do think they would try to overturn Obamacare. And I know we disagree on Obamacare, but I will defend Obamacare in the sense that it was better than what we had previously, and that also worries me greatly.
I think I agree that who's on the court matters. I mean, if it was me and 8 of my clones, right, it would be way different than the results we see now. And I think that'd be like the ideal for me, because I think I'm obviously right. You know, that's how I always argue. So like I think that who matters. I'm just saying, like, given the complexion of the court, where 2 of the Republicans, especially the current Chief Justice, who I think is I think he's kind of like one of those Jeff Flake type Republicans, where he kind of craves that strange new respect from Democrats. So I think he is too afraid to do anything that would paint the Republican court in a bad light. And then seeing Brett Kavanaugh's first term, he sided with Democrats a lot more than they expected, and Democrats were openly saying that the last term wasn't as bad as they expected, even though Republicans had a 5-4 majority. So I guess what I'm saying is, this seat, I can see why people would be upset because it's trending in a direction they don't like, but it's not actually pivotable. It's not like the pivot point, right? It's not going to all of a sudden turn us in the other direction because now it's 6-3. Because if you take into consideration the kind of people that make up that 6, which is our current Chief Justice and Kavanaugh, it's not truly just a straight up 6-3. You have people who are squishy on any huge issue that could remake society. Now, Obamacare is the interesting situation, because that has a lot of all of that is, I mean, if the Supreme Court wants to be consistent with itself, then it should overturn it, because their previous ruling was to defend it because of a interpretation of the individual mandate, and then the individual mandate getting canceled undoes that validity, which undermines that last ruling. But I don't expect consistency. I kind of expect Obamacare to be upheld anyways. And if Biden and company take the presidency, I don't think what the Supreme Court has to say about Obamacare is even going to matter, because they're going to do something else and push other legislation. But I guess my reasoning for bringing up the courts isn't that it's completely meaningless. It's that people are acting like this is one of the most pivotal moments in like U.S. politics in the last several years. And it seems to me that it's clearly not, at least in the ways that people claim it will be, especially abortion. I just don't see that happening, and I would bet good money on it. And seeing hysteria get brought up and everybody getting very, very outraged, insanely outraged, and I'm sure that's all we're going to hear about for months, and all we're going to hear about for years as long as Mitch McConnell is still in office, is going to be hearkening back to when RBG died and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans screwed them. And we're going to hear about this for at least another 4 or 5 years. And it's not warranted, I guess. It's one of those things where I don't get their argument beyond that, just because I don't think their ground assumptions are correct about the current complexion of the court. But yeah, I'm rambling at this point. I just need to get that out of my system. So I'll let you have the last word on that topic.
I guess what we disagree on then is just the general trend of American politics, and just kind of where we see things going in the next several decades. Because I do not think things such as Roe versus Wade are that they're I don't think it's guaranteed that things like that and things like Obamacare will be upheld. And I just say that because, this is just a pattern in American history, which pretty much goes back to the beginning. It's like the Liberal Party gets judges in the court and they rule certain ways, and then a bunch of conservative judges get in the court and they rule kind of just in the opposite direction. And again, like, you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be like a bunch of alt-right people on the court for that to happen. It's just, if a political party if a majority of judges agree with a particular political party, they are liable to try to go as far as they can. We can disagree on perhaps how far that would be exactly, but it's obvious to me, if you look at the history, that is what happens. That the parties are always trying to use the courts to their advantage. So basically, my point is, in short, that political parties will always use the courts to their advantage when it's possible. And I do suspect that if the conservatives can get a majority on the court, even if we assume that they're all like moderate conservatives, I think those moderate conservatives will feel far more confident that they can do more systematic change, because of the because of the lead they have, or because of the majority that they have on the court itself. And so again, we can just slightly disagree on how much they would try to get through if there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. But I do think they will try to get as much done as they can without too much political backlash. And now of course we could even say, well, maybe they couldn't overturn Roe versus Wade because of the political backlash. But the issue in some sense is less about individual rulings. It's more about the general trend of the courts. And at the moment, the general trend of the courts does seem to be conservative. And that does concern me to that extent.
Okay. I think on that aspect, we might have to agree to disagree, because I would have to, I think I'd have to look a little bit more at certain terms, I guess. I do understand the argument you're making, though, and there is something there. At the least, that there's something there. So I think that's fair. I think that's more valid, though, than what the talking heads are saying on TV right now, and that's where my biggest objection is. Now, that raises what you just, I think this episode's tying together well, in the sense that I think the conversation in the courts ties back into the, when they go low, we go lower. And this goes to the question that Joe Biden refuses to answer, which is, should Democrats pack the court if they take office? Now, if you're leaning into the they go low, we go lower, then I think your answer is yes. And then I kind of fist pump, because then I'm like, yeah, nobody will think the Supreme Court's legitimate again. That's awesome. And I'm happy with that being the direction things going, and then that being a complete, a terrible mess for the foreseeable future. With any time a president has Congress of the same party, they just kind of even out the courts no matter what. I could see that happening. So do you think that's likely? And more importantly, do you think they should do it?
So when it comes to something such as adding more justices onto the court, I guess all I would say at this point is I would have to think a bit more about that before I give a substantial opinion. In principle, I guess you could say I'm not, in my principled unprincipledness, or I would not say that I'm necessarily against the idea of packing the courts, just because, just due to the nature of politics, which I've already talked about. But I don't think I know enough about specific suggestions to really say yay or nay to them at this point. As time goes on, and as people are having more conversations about it, and as I can read more about it, then I could get back to you and give a more substantial answer. But that's why, I was a little wary about talking about the courts, because there are answers, or there are questions you could ask me that I don't really have a good answer to at this point.
Well, I personally am hoping they pack the Supreme Court, and I'm hoping that they somehow manage to make Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. a state at the same time. And I'm hoping by adding those 4 Democrats to Congress and adding a bunch of Democrats to the Supreme Court, I hope that combination just causes Texas to on the spot secede. And then we end up in a truly decentralized body, and we at least start working towards localism, which is, I guess, the best I could dream for that's remotely plausible. So I'm hoping Democrats do adopt the principled unprincipledness that you somewhat support to some extent, and I'm hoping it backfires. I think that's the best case scenario in my mind if we're going to elect more politicians that are members of the left, is that unforeseen consequence. Is there anything you want to add before I wrap this one up? No? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in this conversation. I know we tackled two very different topics. I know John Zerzan and anarcho-primitivism is a little different than RBG dying and getting replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. Those are very different topics in pretty much every degree. But I hope we gave you a little bit of interesting commentary on both of those. I might dig more into anarcho-primitivism in the future just because there's a lot there that could be claimed that at least has a hint of truth and might be worth exploring. So we'll be back and we'll have more information on random topics that we decide to discuss. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Tune in next week and subscribe. And you can find us on all your podcatchers just by searching Beyond Talking Points, or on YouTube by searching The Anti-Philosopher and Beyond Talking Points. And then you can see us, as we take turns muting ourselves while the other person talks. We make all these unenthusiastic faces just because we're getting very angered when we disagree with each other. Although this episode had a lot of agreement for the most part up till the end, and we only disagreed in terms of like somewhat minute ways. So you won't see that as much as say in the episode about our a priori principles. If you watch any of those, I look pissed the whole time, and I have to try not to yell, and then you're like completely displeased with me. So those are fun ones too. So yeah, feel free to check those out. I hope you guys enjoyed. And signing off, it's Matt and Matt.